G'day folks, it's just Benno here. Just going to give you a quick tutorial on assessing risk. Now, some people have to forgive me for my handwriting on this board too. Some people think that assessing risk is quite a boring approach to operating business. So, I guess one of the big things is that it should never really be conducted by a single person. It really should be conducted as a group, whether that's a group session or whether it's individuals conducting it on their own and then bringing their ideas back to the table about what sorts of levels of risk that they perceive may be occurring. And the big benefit behind doing it that way is that we get better clarity and clarity as well as depth of the information that we really want. So the further or the more people that are involved in it, obviously the bigger the task becomes with the more people involved in it, and sometimes you may have to chop and change things to speed things up. But largely we get better clarity, we get better depth, because we get all these different perceptions about how people think a certain hazard may be interpreted, and then the way that we can control the risks attached to that hazard. And it doesn't necessarily have to be an OH&S hazard. It could be a financial risk, it could be an operational risk, it may even be a risk that's attached to part of your strategic planning, which is kind of where this is probably going to head anyway. So we can use it for obviously OH&S, we can use it for finance, so the dollar side of things. We can use it for operational risk as well. Alright, so I guess the big thing with it is that it has a few tools, and some of you may have already seen some of these tools in the past. I'll flick across a page. Oh, I might be on the wrong page. Alright, I'll go back one page. The hierarchy of control is one really simple measure that most of us probably are aware of these days. You may have even had it in another session with me somewhere along the line, maybe another tutorial. So this is one tool that we can do a very basic assessment of how we can control a particular hazard. So in essence, it is a little bit of a risk, it has risk attached to it. Other than that, if I switch across to this page up here, we have the Australian Standard Risk Matrix. So these two tools can work in conjunction with each other, and typically most people would have seen them in an OH&S context, but we can use them, as I said, for the other risks or the other potential, OH&S, finance, operational risk. The sky's the limit when it really comes to it. It's a really functional tool. It can even help us in motivating individuals. Alright, so motivation commonly is something that can hold up a project, that could hold up relations between people in the workplace, things like that. So what we really want to think about is, alright, if there's a certain level of risk attached to something, how can we use that level of risk to motivate people to do their job better, maybe? And it may be as simple as just, alright, what's the risk attached to putting somebody who doesn't like speaking in public up on the public stage? So that could be a way of thinking about, alright, how can we use that to motivate people purely by using it to motivate the team to put their hand up and say, right, actually that person, yeah, okay, I agree that that person doesn't really like speaking in public. So we can then enable someone else to put their hand up, hopefully, and say, right, oh, cool, I'll take that job on. We can also use the risk assessment, I guess you might say, to not so much pigeonhole. I shouldn't use the word pigeonhole. I actually should use the term I'm going to put categorise. So what is the type of risk that we have? Is it something that's going to hold up the strategic planning process? Is it something that's going to maybe make someone feel uncomfortable in their job? And in the long run, the long and short of it, the risk will help us optimise our goals. Alright, so there is another document that we can use, I guess, or another tool, and it is called an action plan. Alright, I'm going to speak about these three documents very quickly, and how we can use them to optimise our goals that we seek from, whether it's a personal goal, whether it's a team goal, whether it's a whole of business goal, to achieve what we really need to be innovative and keep abreast of, I guess, the issues that arise through business. Now, action plan, as we call it, spells out pretty blatantly what it's all about. It's about actioning the plan and giving people tasks or roles or their own micro goals, you might say, to achieve the bigger goal. Now, an action plan doesn't have to be crazy busy or, you know, document heavy or whatever it might be. It might be something as simple as this quite childish little drawing of, looks like it's made in Texter. So it actually spells out what, how, who and when. Alright, simple as that. Now if it's an ongoing project, we might do something like put a set of traffic lights against it, as people call it. So we might say, yeah, it's actually got a green light to say that it's on track. Alright. Now you might have seen this traffic light stuff in the past, in previous stuff. We might even just say, alright, cool, we're being halted for whatever reason. It might be the fact that we can't get access to information, it might be the fact that we've run out of funding, or we haven't got the funding for the project distributed widely. And then finally we've got our red light. And obviously that means we're fully at stop. What the hell has happened to get to that point? Now, like I say, those three are realistically, three lights I should say, are realistically a guiding process to say, righto, are we on track, aren't we on track? And what hell do we need to do to get out of this situation if we're either in the orange or the red situations? Alright, so that's a quick summary on three of the tools that we would use, potentially. There is other tools out there, like the PDCA tool, the Plan, Do, Check, Act tool, which basically says, alright, we're going to plan everything, we're going to check it, we'll test it, and then we'll act on anything that comes out of it. And generally that PDCA cycle, or the Deming cycle, as people call it sometimes, will run with these things, these other three tools ticking along in the background. So, to not be too confusing, I'm going to go switch back to this page, alright, and I'm going to add us a new page in there, and I'm going to go back to our black pen. Alright, so I guess the course of action would be from here is to, oops, that's probably a little bit big. Pop that out, switch back to pen. Alright, would be to start off by assessing, I'm going to call it risk, but it's kind of more like, alright, so assess and identify, I guess. And that would use something like a SWOT analysis, or just simply a group meeting. Alright, what do we really think is going on? Alright, and then from that, we could potentially use the hierarchy, sorry, it's a bit of a weird word, control, to see whether we can, you know, eliminate it, replace it, modify it, put some admin in there that's going to control it. And then from there, we would use our risk matrix to really punch out what the level of risk is associated from there to there, if that makes sense. Alright, now I've given you guys access to a risk matrix that is pretty much automated. And when I've done this slideshow, I'll present another one to you on how to use that risk matrix, just so that you understand it, because it actually takes into account pretty much almost all three of the tools that we just described there in the action plan, the risk matrix, and semi looks at the hierarchy of control without really actually looking at it. So, when we've done those first three things, what do we get out of it? Well, we come out with your action plan. Alright, how the hell are we going to do it? Who's doing what job? How do we know how long it's going to take us to do that job? Are there any additional funds or, additional crewing arrangements or whatever it might be to get that job done? We might have 20 factors in there. Might be 2, it might be 1. Just depends on what we're going to do. Alright, just so for the benefit of the people who haven't actually used the hierarchy of control, just a quick summary of it, alright? And like I say, typically used to manage OH&S. Alright, so top to bottom, you can see that we've got this scale on the left hand side that basically says elimination is the most effective way to control any sort of hazard or a hazard that's going to eventually end up in a risk, or the risks inside that hazard. Alright, and by the time we look at the way we move down, we end up getting to PPE, which obviously is a control for OH&S more so than any operational project attached to financing or strategic planning. And you can see here that PPE is the least effective control mechanism when it comes to controlling a hazard. Alright, obviously, as we said, elimination is the most controlling, pretty much because it eliminates the hazard altogether. It's very, 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 very hard to eliminate a hazard. Put it this way, if I was to say that you're a firefighter and to eliminate the fire hazard, you would never actually go and fight fire. Instead, we use PPE, like our safety gear. We use administrative controls. Alright, so we basically tell people, alright, how to fight the fire. You might use engineering controls. So these guys have now, these days, they've got GPS and satellite phones and all sorts of stuff to be able to prevent people from actually getting into the worst case situations that they get into. And then substitution, in that situation of being a firefighter, it's pretty hard to replace the hazard because the hazard is what you're there for. Alright, so like I say, we can actually use this to manage the risks in an operational plan, for instance, as well. And I'm going to go into that very quickly. So, I guess the big thing from now is that we just probably need to have a quick look at, I'm going to switch to a new hierarchy of control just so it's cleaned up a little bit. In a fisheries context, or even just a fisheries management context or whatever we might have, say we're looking at putting X project out to the public, alright? What are some of the risks that we might have or that we could maybe use the hierarchy of control for? Very quickly in that context, I can think of 2 major risks that are involved in it. And the first one would be incorrect information. So making sure that our information that we're putting out there is adequate for the population, or not the population, sorry, adequate for the audience that we're looking at delivering that information to. So don't give them misinformation. That's the predominant thing, is if we give them misinformation, we're going to start giving people the wrong idea about how good we are at our jobs, I guess you might say. And the other immediate one that I can think of is ensuring that we are delivering the information in an adequate manner. Alright, so there's no sense trying to cater to an 80-year-old crowd with an iPad. Most of the time, you probably really want to, if that was your focus, I'm not saying that it is, but if that was your focus in trying to communicate to an aging population, you might not go with more innovative technology. You might go with what we would say would be standard communication methods, flyers, newspaper releases, maybe something on the TV, things like that. Alright, so just very quickly again, we'll just look at, we'll just go with trying to see if we can use the hierarchy of control for it, and then we'll skip across to the risk matrix, and then we'll go to the action plan for it. So, if we just look at incorrect information, alright, can we eliminate that hazard completely with 100% certainty that we've got the right information out there? And the simple fact of the matter is, no, we can't. So as science gives us the information, it's only got a certain amount of certainty behind it in its scientific approach. It might be 95% confident data, it might be 99% confident data to say, yeah, this is correct. So I would say, in my mind, that it's very unlikely that any control we put in place would ever eliminate that hazard of incorrect information. Now, isolating people from a hazard, that isn't going to happen. We need to basically tell people this information. We've got administrative controls, because we're not going to be able to use PPE either. And we could use a replacement, not so much a replacement, but a substitution control in place there to potentially minimise the impact of misinformation. Now, predominantly what I'm thinking of in the substitution terms is sometimes we call this avoidance. Alright, now what I'm actually thinking of here is disseminating that information to a population of people, alright, of which a portion of that population may be not so much illiterate, but they may not understand the language that we're speaking. So they might be Asian, they might be Indian, they might be from Mars. Who really cares where it happens? If we have our information that they don't understand correctly, alright, they're not getting the right information, are they? So, what can we do to replace that hazard? Now, a quick thought in my head would be it's not going to fit in there. Go out. An interpreter, for instance, or something like that, or subtitles in situations. All right, is that going to be adequately to control the information? Quite possible, as would correct research. All right, now administrative controls. We don't really need to go to it per se, because if we think about having the correct research and the correct substitution in there for avoiding that risk in terms of the literacy side of things, we've got a higher control there than we do at administrative control. But say if we couldn't replace it and we couldn't use engineering and we couldn't use PPE, what administrative controls could we use in that place? And it's quite likely to be, publishing repeatability. So making sure that we get whatever we print or whatever we're going to publish is repeatable in as many different forms as possible. So if we carry through to the risk matrix at the moment, we see there's a bunch of letters and numbers that really don't mean much to most people. But what we can think about in terms of our communication strategy, in terms of the misinformation, is that if we don't have a control in place, which is what we should assess all risk for at the start, without any control whatsoever in place. So what's the likelihood of our information being incorrect and being interpreted the wrong way, or just being plain crap, if we don't put a control in place? Alright? So, and what's the effect Alright, so the hazard is more of cause, and the risk is the effect that it would normally have on a project, for instance. So if our project's communicating to the wider public about a particular fisheries management issue, and we don't have a control in place, we would consider it very likely that the communication protocols or the communication strategy might fail. Alright? Now, in the terms of the outcomes of the strategy, obviously we'd have to have a goal attached to that. What is our outcome? Do we want 90% of the people in the population to understand what we're talking about? Could possibly be a figure like that. And that would be a figure that the team would come up with, I guess. So, what is the likelihood of the project failing should we not have a control in place around the miscommunication of information? Alright, so if it's about the project itself failing, we would consider it up here as a high. Does that make sense? Alright, so now we've put in a control of maybe having an interpreter or some sort of interpretive device. Like I said, it might be subtitles, or it might be an iPad app that speaks in 100 different languages, for instance. And let's just say, all right, we're seeking 80% compliance. Or, you know, an 80% uptake, that people actually agree with it, or they understand it, or whatever it might be. So, with the control in place of that information that's going to be less easy to misinterpret because of iPad apps and all those other things we just spoke about, what's the likelihood of this project failing? Alright, so in a group you might come up with a situation that it's still possible that it fails, right? But is the outcome of the risk exactly the same, or is it different? So most of the time I like to say that this stuff here might decrease on the left hand side, so the likelihood of that particular risk having an effect is likely to decrease, but the outcome is still the same if it does still fail. Alright? So we would be sitting over here still in the medium to high column. Alright, so now you can see here we had a real big problem. We put in a risk control, right, aka being the subtitles or the interpreter or whatever it might be, and we came out with a risk that's dropped majorly in its risk outcome. So it's still a severe outcome, but it has now decreased in its consequence. Alright, so we might go through 100 different styles of these, and people might say, oh, I reckon it's unlikely, and I reckon it's very likely, and you might just summarise that and go, righto, what do people say? How many C's and B's did I have? Righto, cool, let's just take the average at most. Or you may err on the side of caution and go with the biggest number around the median, or around the mean, or around the average, to try and find out, alright, let's just be really cautious about this, because it's about making sure that we err on the side of caution. And we call it in fisheries management terms the precautionary approach, and the precautionary approach basically says if we don't have enough scientific data to support a particular situation, let's over-manage it so that we avoid just about every risk. So the precautionary approach is a risk mitigation strategy for fisheries management. Okay, so from here, what do we need to do? Alright, and this is where the action plan comes in. We'll go back to our little childish drawing. Alright, and I'm just going to go in here. So let's just say, I'm just going to put in here iPad. Alright, so I'm going to coordinate the development of an iPad app that basically now, alright, let's just use fishing regulations, that now has the fishing regulations on it, rather than people browsing through the internet when they, you know, for instance, we don't have internet connection everywhere we go on our iPhones or our iPad. So if we have an app, it's a lot more accessible. Alright, how am I going to do it? So I'm going to just going to put in here Guru. I'm going to access somebody that actually knows what they're talking about, and he's going to do it for me. But I'm sort of going to be his management team, I guess you might say. I'm going to put my name in here, and then I'm going to time bound it. Alright, so when I'm talking about this stuff, I also have to have some sort of time frame, and I'm going to put, just because I need to fit it in here, I'm just going to put February. So that's when it's due. Alright, and at this stage, I'm running on schedule. So I've got a green light against me, pretty much. Alright, so in the essence of all of our goals or our action plans or whatever it might be, they should all operate under SMART principle, or I shouldn't say they all should operate under it, but it's a really good mindset to get yourself into. So the SMART principle: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. Alright, so what have we got in here? Essentially the S becomes the what, the measurable becomes, well, the measurable would be the outcome of whether I get the iPad app built or not. Is it achievable? I don't see why not, with the Guru helping me out. Is it realistic? I think, yeah, if I get this Guru on board, I've definitely got a realistic time frame. And once again, time frame. Alright, so if we look at the SMART principles once again, that's the group thing. Does the group feel the need that or not the need, does the group feel that we can get this job done in that time frame? And that obviously depends on the skill levels of everybody and so on and so forth like that. So, if I just go, I'll write this stuff back out. There's still some other things in there we spoke about. So we had, alright, interpreter. How? Guru. Alright, it's Will's job to do it. And he's going to have to get an interpreter for my iPad app. Oh, probably January. At very bare minimum, try and interpret at least one different language. Alright, we might have this by 10, or so on and so forth. So we can see that, alright, now we've got a little plan, and like I say, it doesn't have to be anything amazing. Typically people would put it into some sort of action plan management system or project management system, or you know, some of these are web-based, cloud-based, some are iPad apps, iPhone apps, all that sort of stuff. Some people will just manage it on a spreadsheet. Alright, so it's not as quick as I thought it was going to be to get through this, but I'll end it here for this one, and then I'll send you into the next session with trying to think about this stuff in the background. But what we have is, like I said, a semi-automated spreadsheet that takes into account all of this stuff in the one document.